You guessed it, it's another episode of the InfoSec and OSINT Show. I'm Josh Amishav, and this week we talked to Peter Taylor, who's the founder of Peter Taylor Consultants and a specialist in all aspects of fraud. My three main takeaways from conversation were: 1, the most common types of fraud he sees in his investigations; 2, how COVID has influenced the fraud space; and 3, why age shell companies and email addresses are so valuable. You'll enjoy those two things, plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense, the data breach monitoring platform. More details can be found at breachsense.io. And now, here's my conversation with Peter. Peter Taylor, welcome to the show.
Hello, Josh, and thanks for inviting me.
So, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Peter Taylor. I have a brand name, The Fraud Guy, which isn't a self-appointed nickname. It's just that I found in my career, everybody keeps saying, "This is Peter, he's the fraud guy," or "our fraud guy." I've been in the counter-fraud world for about 30 years.
Cool. So we were talking before, and you were talking about the different types of fraud. And somebody's been in the industry for 30 years. What are the more common types of fraud that you see?
Yeah, mainly I tend to deal with corporate and corporation fraud. So you've got the online retailers, like your Amazons and Argos and everybody, and they suffer mainly from account takeover, false IDs, and they're being hit a lot at the moment with refund fraud. I do a lot of work with insurers and insurance claims. So there's claims fraud where people put in false claims, and then there's ghost broking, which is the biggest problem they've got at the moment, is where people are selling bogus insurance policies cheaply via social media. But the one that actually is most important to me is really the frauds on individuals. You're the victim impact there. So we've got a lot of phishing scams, vishing and smishing, to use the terms, where people are getting texts and emails, and they click a link and they're taken through to a clone website that will ask them for their card details or identity details. They then have the data harvested, or they lose their money. And then the other one, which applies across both businesses, small business and private individuals, is the investment fraud. So the big one at the moment is Forex and crypto scams. So you join a crypto club, doing one at the moment where you promised 3% interest per day over a week, which is 18% or 21% in a week. You pay in, but you never get to draw back. Company quickly disappears when you start asking for your money. So, all of it has a huge impact. And it's, as I say, I think about victim impact. So, if you've got somebody who's got £6,000 that they've accumulated over 20 years and they lose it, that's as bad as a corporation losing 60 million, through ransomware. So there's just so much of it about. I mean, Josh, one thing I would say is I've never seen fraud evolve so fast as it has done in the last three years. It's been like the same as it evolved in the previous 30.
How do you explain that?
Technology is a huge help. People's connections to technology as well. The smartphone, they're all good things, don't get me wrong, but the convenience of, being able to pay for things with your smartphone has a downside as well. And we always say that people forget to build fraud in to products and ideas because they're convenient and they're going to be big sellers. And that's very, very true. But the other side to that is that I think people in counter fraud and cybersecurity need to also build convenience into fraud solutions, because the nightmare is, false positives, which is where you think somebody's a fraudster. So you decline transactions, decline customers, or make life hard for them when you should actually be trying to make it as easy as possible for the genuine people. And I can say, quite controversially, is that 90% of people are as honest as the day is long, but the 10% are so blooming prolific nowadays. It is just the estimate, isn't it, that by 2025 there's going to be $1 trillion industry, which is, cybercrime.
Have you seen, specifically you mentioned the last 3 years, you've seen a big change. Over the last year, has there been any significant or anything new based on like COVID-related fraud?
Well, I don't think there's actually been that much new. I think the problem is, you've spoken to, you speak to social engineers and everything else. And my feedback, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, Josh, is I actually do a lot of research with cyber criminals and reform cyber criminals. So I feel like my finger is on the pulse a little bit quicker than other people's. because I think a lot of people spend time doing research with victims, which I do, but I actually like to go and speak to the offenders. So reformed cybercriminals, I do a lot of work with people like Brett Johnson, who runs a site called Anglerfish, and who was a founding member for Shadow Crew, one of the first global cybercrime gangs, who's now become a good guy. So I do quite a bit of work with him. So I actually research it and go and see what happens. So during the COVID situation, you just got more of some things and less of others. But one bit of feedback I did get directly from the cyber criminals is that when they send you an email, if we think of just emails, Josh, you get an email and the header is, we have a surprise for Walmart customers. If you are a Walmart customer, you're more likely to click that. Or free £500 voucher. You are our millionth customer. So there are all these ways of getting you to open the first thing you've got to do is to open the email. If you don't open the email, you're not going to click the link. So they want you to open the email. They want to, put some kind of urgency in there. But obviously what they found was when they put the words COVID-19 in the header, that 4 times as many people opened the email. So COVID-19 just became a really, just adapt whatever scam it was to something around COVID-19. And then having used that header, you can be selling PPE, selling investments in PPE companies, false investments. So COVID got used in that way. The other way I've seen it it started in Italy, but where COVID started was that the local gangsters were buying up businesses that were going bust, or likely to go bust through COVID, and then using them to launder money. But then that quickly adapted and became a way of taking bank loans, the COVID loans and the COVID grants and everything else. And we will not know the real extent of that, I don't think, until next year, 2022. So, so it's things like in the UK, you saw on eBay that people were selling limited companies that had never been used, like a shelf company that had been registered in 2018, and you were getting between £2,000 and £5,000 for that. And what it was that the date of the company meant that it qualified for a bank bounce back loan. So the criminals were buying these companies up so they could put through bounce back loans and COVID loans and rates grants and everything else. But that kind of stuff has always gone on. The people that were fiddling, the VAT frauds, and it's the same people, but they've sort of widened their portfolio.
Yeah, and we've seen similar things with email breaches, where companies you'll have fraud systems that will check. One of the ways they'll check to see if a email looks fraudulent has it been registered in the last 24 hours, as opposed to this email. This email appears in 15 different breaches spanning over the last 5 years. That tends to lend more credibility to that email account, even though it could be the opposite, because the criminals just basically didn't account takeover attack for those credentials.
Yeah, but I've got to admit, and I'm not here to advertise products, but Email Age, I just think is absolutely fantastic. See it in action, where an email, somebody's been on an online retail site to make a purchase. They've been on the site 6 minutes. They're now making a purchase, but the email address is 8 minutes old. That's fraud. You've got a pretty good chance that's going to be fraud. I'm from a counter-fraud background, so it was all about fraud management and fraud systems, and mainly about where the victims were insurers, governments and banks. And in 2017, I did my own research project because I wanted to educate myself on organised cybercrime. I found it really, really interesting, Josh. But I actually, as a result of that, I released a research paper, or extracts from my research papers, in 2017. And one of the things that I had identified is that the criminals were actually building databases. So what they were doing is they were taking, basically on an Excel spreadsheet or an Access sheet, and they were just registered as many free emails as they could and putting them on there and then saving them for 3 years, so that when you put them on Email Age, they come back as being 3 years old. So I had predicted, and one thing that didn't happen was synthetic fraud was big in 2021, but it wasn't 2021 and 2020.
What's synthetic fraud?
Synthetic fraud is where you create a false identity that actually fits the lending criteria or the insurance criteria more easily than a real person. So, and there are lots of things you can do. I don't want to give it, produce a training module for people that want to become fraudsters. So synthetic fraud was a big prediction of mine. But what happened in reality was that the criminals were making so much money from unemployment fraud and everything else that they didn't really need to do as much with synthetic fraud as they had anticipated. So I think we've still got all that to come, but a brief way would be, Josh, one of the downsides for the organised cyber criminals is if they buy what's called a fulls. So when you buy somebody's identity online, you get what's a document called the fulls, FULLZ, which is short for full details. And you've got all the information there for, so that you can go out and take credit and use their identity, account takeovers or whatever. The downside to that is that not everybody's got a good credit rating. Some people are completely overdrawn, and the credit cards are fully maxed out. So, but they still cost the same, and you don't know that until you buy the identity. So, believe it or not, the criminals actually do credit checks on the targets that they're going to use for account takeover. But what they found was that they could actually adjust those details to actually improve the feasibility of that person being given a loan. But you can actually create a new identity. And this is something I've actually seen, Josh, is you create an identity. So one way of doing it would be if say, of a student building, where lots of students stay and come and go and people constantly change, you just register somebody to that address, create an email for them, find a genuine social security number that will work for them, because a lot of times people don't actually match the social security number with the individual. They just know it's a real social security number. And then you wait. They might have a 0 credit rating or a poor credit rating. So all you do then is you start applying for high interest credit builder type credit cards. Initially, you'll be rejected. But every time you apply, your credit rating will go up. So eventually somebody will give you a card. And then once you've got that card, all the other lenders want to lend to you then. It's the Me Too principle. If Barclays will lend to you, then Citibank wants to lend to you. If neither of them will lend to you, then nobody wants to lend to you. So it's the Me Too principle. It's a lot more complex than that. It's still not rocket science. It's just a matter of patience and endeavour. And these guys work really hard. And it's, a real example to industry.
So let me ask you on the individual end, what can people do to help protect themselves against being manipulated?
Yeah, I think one thing that sadly, if you really are bothered about it, is you remember is obviously there's protecting your own data and the sensible things that you can do yourself. So, it is things like if you get, not opening links, not opening documents, having antivirus on your computer, but also having protection on your phone.
Well, how do you not open links when you're getting your people doing business with either the email spoofed or they're doing business with other people? How can you not open links?
Yeah, well, what you can do is you can particularly for a corporate environment, but we're talking about private individuals, their corporate environments will usually have some form of protection where they can isolate, if you open up a malicious link, they'll isolate it onto your computer so it doesn't go any further, and then they can clean it out, which sounds a bit, but we're going back to sort of the private individual, you can do things like that, but we now have reached a point where really you have to check your credit rep file, check your own credit file, and see if there's things on there that you don't recognise. And you can actually put things like credit freezes on.
Yeah, that seems like a much better approach to freeze credit and then unfreeze it when you need it.
Yeah. But there again, I suppose, the fraudsters can, if you've got a credit freeze and you can change it, they'll change it for you. But it's still, you're going to be, it's a little bit like the picket, they use the picket fence example. If you've got a front garden with no fence, people might cut across it. If you put an 18-inch picket fence that people can step over, most people won't step over it. So your garden is protected by something that's sort of visual. So the more you do, and then eventually that becomes a 6-foot wall, there's less chance of people, so you've got to keep things in perspective. But I think checking your credit file or being aware of your credit. The other one as well is if you've got an amount of credit on a credit card available to you and you're not using it, then just reduce it. If you've got 10 grand available on a card for emergencies and you've had it there for 20 years and you've still not used it, well, now's the time to cut it down to £1,500 or £1,000. So there's sensible things you can do like that. But the other ones are things like, I suppose, being aware. Because that's one of the things with ghost brokers. People buy bogus insurance companies. Insurance policies. Or even if you're buying Ugg boots that aren't real Ugg boots from a company in Australia, you're paying by a credit card. And you're giving them people your credit card details and the code off the back of your card. So you're kind of like exposing yourself twice. Yeah, so you're allowing, you know that those Ugg boots probably aren't going to be real, but you'll be told something like they're made by the same factory, but they come out of the back door. And then you've given somebody your credit card details. And once they've got that, they won't just try and empty, run up your credit or empty your bank account. They'll think of other ways that they can use you and your identity to commit fraud. So education is a big part of it. And the other one is actually telling the people you care about. So if you hear of a new scam, actually warning your family and your friends, which so few people do, where, we're professionals in counter fraud, but we don't tell our own kids, don't tell our own wife, and they tell us when they've been ripped off.
I've had the opposite experience. You get those messages, on Signal, WhatsApp, or Telegram, or whatever, that just get forwarded umpteen times about various fraud hacks that are going on that are not real or that have been circulating the internet for years.
Yeah.
And then you end up just ignoring everything because it's hard to differentiate between what's real and what's not.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you on that. That is the worst thing about it is the fear, uncertainty and doubt sells product. And I think one of the worst things we've got going on at the moment is really, really poor ethical selling of fraud solutions backed up by poor stats that aren't actually real or misinformation because it sells product. And so I would never forward a link to other people that I didn't know was real. And the other one is just because somebody can do it doesn't mean they will. And we can do so much with technology now, but just because we can doesn't mean we will. It's like we were talking earlier, and you mentioned, voice cloning type things where people are saying that deep fakes have been used because somebody rang an office and convinced them that they were somebody they knew.
I just know when I call my bank, they tell me in order to identify myself when I call the bank there's a sentence I have to say. And you watch these like Tom Cruise deep fake videos, and they're spot on. So there's enough audio of me out there. You can create the same sentence and identify as me. Yeah,
but will you? Would they? And do they? Because the most famous case, as I say, was a business compromise, and they were saying that he sounded just like the person, but was he just putting a Scottish accent on? Nobody knows. I think we need to be more certain about whether or not some of these things are being used. And I think a lot of it as well is about being practical with stuff that we've already got available. We've already got, already detect devices. We can set, geolocation, internet service providers, email matching, email verification, phone verification. We could already use things like layered voice analysis to tell whether or not somebody's actually telling us the truth, whether somebody's distressed and stressed rather than lying, whether somebody's vulnerable.
So what are the business cases for layered voice analysis within fraud?
It speeds the process up, reduces false positives, and the business case analysis that I'm given is that you don't need as many fraud analysts if they've actually got the right tools. And that doesn't just apply to, layered voice analysis. It applies to lots of other things as well. You want a well-equipped fraud analyst as opposed to a fraud analyst who's not given the support, not given the equipment, and not given the tools to actually do the job properly. Nobody will have all the tools that are available. You have to work out which tools are actually suitable for that environment, and then use them wherever you can. But it's about confident, composed fraud analysts or fraud decision makers that have got all the support that they need to actually make defensible decisions, to make the right decision. Because the easiest thing with fraud is just reject everything, and that happens, I think, too often.
So would you rely on voice analytics then to change your decision, or was that just going to be a portion of a number of other steps that you're doing to detect fraud?
So in terms of how I've used it, it's helped me to focus on what needs investigating. Where am I going to focus on or concentrate on within this investigation? Where is the issue? So like for an insurance claim, there are only 4 areas where an insurance claim can have fraud on it. And they are, are the circumstances genuine? Has this incident really happened? The underwriting, has the person told the truth about themselves when they've taken the insurance policy out? The items, or the bit, or what the loss is. Is that loss worth £3,000, £30,000, and then technical issues. So have any conditions been complied with? So it's about focusing on which area where the problem may be. So that helps you to validate quicker. So, so you can say, right, there's nothing wrong here on the circumstances. There's nothing wrong here on the technical issues. There's nothing wrong here on the loss and substantiation. So, that leaves me with this. I can focus on this. So you're using your time, a lot more wisely. So that's using the insurance example. And the same applies with any type of fraud investigation or financial crime investigation. I find it a useful tool. But if you're not actually interacting with the customer or the suspect or the witnesses by phone or verbally, then you need something else instead there. So that's where, again, things come in like device detection and whatever.
What are the most odd types of fraud that you've come across? Right.
That's an interesting question, because I'm always telling people funny stories, I think, from fraud. Give you some examples. Back in the day when I was first starting out as an investigator, I used to do covert surveillance, and I'd been doing covert surveillance in Manchester, and the job was done by about 2:00, whereas we'd expected to stay there till about 7:00. So drove back to the office, and as I was driving back the following day, I had a shirt and tie interview to do with a guy who'd had an escape of water claim, but I wasn't sure where his house was, so I went to have a look. So I drove down and parked up in my surveillance vehicle that had all the cameras on and everything. And the guy was watering his hallway with a hose pipe. So we had a claim in, obviously, for upstairs, flood up, from upstairs that had come into the hallway and the dining room. And the guy was just there with a watering, with his hose and everything. So I just switched the cameras on and recorded him. Quick call into the insurance company, sent them a copy. I said, what do you want me to do? They said, well, can you just go and tell him, that you've got him on film? So I said, yeah, okay, no problem. So I went up and I said, I just, as we do in Manchester, quite casual, I said, excuse me, have you got a minute, mate? And the guy just looked over his shoulder and says, no, he says, I've got some from the insurance company coming tomorrow. And I said, I've got some bad news. I have from the insurance company. I've come a day early. I said, I've just been filming you. And so that obviously the claim was withdrawn. There wasn't a lot I could say about that.
So let me just pivot a bit. You run your own consulting, fraud consulting agency. Do you have any tips or suggestions for somebody who wants to open up their own consulting company?
Yeah, I think you've got to have a clear vision of what you're going to do and who you're going to work for, because fraud is just such a broad church. And I would class myself as a little bit of a sort of a general practitioner, to sort of use the medical terms. But I think you've got to know what you're good at and concentrate on that. So, like for me, for the consultancy, I do fraud reviews and fraud advice. I do training. And I do investigation, but I do it within what I know, and I'm conscious of what I don't know. I try and fill the gap as much as possible, but there's no way any of us can know everything. So it's actually having a sort of a clear vision of what is it that you do. And as I say, for me, I work for insurance companies, online retailers, and for business people or private individuals that have been defrauded. Give advice on cybersecurity, and I do research on organised cybercrime, but I've always worked in the organised crime areas. But I know what I do and I know what I don't do.
So let's take a step back then. So in order to know what you're good at, how would you, if somebody want to get into fraud investigations today, 2021, just started new, what's the path?
Yeah, it depends on the individual, of course. But I think if you actually wanted to start, I think the first place to start is to actually find a job somewhere where you can, be taught the ropes. One of the reasons I joined the police, believe it or not, was because I wanted to set up an investigations business. So I joined the police so I could learn about it. So there are those options. More so in cybersecurity than fraud, there are a lot of qualifications that you can take. And again, I'd be careful about that because you can end up with a list as long as your arm of all these qualifications, which is the equivalent really, that you've passed your driving test on a simulator, but you've never actually driven on a motorway. So it's trying to gain experience and gather experience. But you can't really be actually working as an investigator for somebody like the police, the NHS, any of the insurance companies, the loss adjusters, and actually find out if you like it. Because one thing I've found in the fraud world is there tends to be two paths, and that's people that do it for 6 to 12 months and then go off and do something else. But taking that knowledge with them, or people that are in it for life. So what you wouldn't want to do is, you need to find out if you do actually like it, because it isn't everybody's cup of tea. And it can be quite a negative thing as well, that I do find some people that are in fraud, they become very sort of cynical about everybody. Everybody's lying, everybody's bent, everybody's crooked. And because I've been around long enough, I remember hitting that about the year 2000. And I realised I had to get sort of balance in my life. So I went off and did training on neuro-linguistic programming, cognitive behaviour therapy, and sunshine things, to sort of balance that so it doesn't all become very dark. There are certain qualifications. The credit card fraud specialist in the UK is the most accepted qualification and will open the doors for you. For people like the NHS and local government. The American Certified Fraud Examiner, which operates globally and is recognised in a lot of countries. So it shows that you've done the knowledge, but the other one is trying to make sure that you've got some kind of decent and useful experience. But again, be careful who you work for. See what their reputation is like. Because you can learn bad habits as well.
Cool. All right, Peter, where can people learn more about you?
About me? My website, www.ptc-ltd.co.uk. LinkedIn, Peter Taylor, ACFS, I think is my name on there. And I'm also now working with Brett Johnson, and we have a website, www.cybercrime101.com.
Awesome. Peter, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah. Plus, Josh, they can always ask you for my details, can't they?
I'll look forward to that.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks again for listening and leaving reviews. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'm @Jamoose on Twitter, or drop me an email at podcast@breachsense.io. And if you're part of a security team that needs visibility into your employees, customers, third-party suppliers' breach credentials before criminals exploit them, head on over to breachsense.io to apply for a free 7-day trial. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back in your earbuds next Thursday morning.